I believe the recording has started. Hello, Namaste and greetings. I, Samiran Galgali, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all at IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on Defense, Foreign Policy and Interim Union Budget 2024-25 as part of IMPRI 4th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Interim Union Budget 2024-25. This discussion is organized by the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, CIRSS, IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Now, let me introduce you to the esteemed gathering. The distinguished panelists for the session are Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji, retired professor, International Relations, Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and visiting professor, IMPRI. Major General Dr. K Chakravorty ji, VSM retired, strategic thinker on security issues and visiting senior fellow, IMPRI. Mr. Robinder N Sachdev ji, President, the Image India Institute, New Delhi, and founder, the Lemonade Party. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat ji, Distinguished Fellow, Vivekananda International Foundation, VIF, New Delhi, and visiting Distinguished Fellow, IMPRI, and Dr. Laxman Behera ji, Associate Professor, Special Center for National Security Studies, JNU. Welcome everyone. We look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. I invite Bhanvi, researcher at IMPRI, to please begin with her opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I will be taking this opportunity to give a brief overview about various budget allocations as well as a comparative analysis of numeric figures that has been allocated to the budget of 2024 and comparative to 2023. So starting with the budget for Ministry of Defense. Budget for the Ministry of Defense has been set at rupees 6.21 lakh crores. That has a hike of around 4.72% from rupees 5.9 lakh crores in financial year 2023-24. It constitutes around 13.04% of the total budget. Then coming to the budgetary allocation for capital expenditure in defense for financial year 24-25, it stands at rupees 1.72 lakh crores, which is 20.33% higher than the actual expenditure of financial year 2022-23. And it is around 9.40% more than the revised allocation of financial year 23-24. So the allocation is in line with the long-term integrated perspective plan, LTIPP, of the three services, with a 43% hike to rupees 5,000 crores in financial year 23-24 as against rupees 3,500 crores in financial year 22-23. There is a clear thrust towards infrastructure strengthening in the border areas. This will in turn strengthen the communication with border areas that are a major area of focus these days. So the second highlight of the budget would be total allocation to ex-servicemen welfare scheme for FY 24-25, which is around 28% higher than the allocation for FY 23-24. That was from rupees 5,431.56 CR to rupees 6,968 CRs. So if we see, this has a significant higher allocation that has to take care for medical treatment related expenditure as well that incurred during the COVID period, and to compensate the increase in ECHS, that is ex-servicemen Center for Health Services, rates are bringing it at the par with the CGHS, that is the center government rates. This is in line with the government resolve to provide best health services to ex-servicemen, war veterans, Veer Naris, and their family members. So, in light of the continued threat perception faced at the Indo-China border, there continues a jump in the capital budget allocation to the Border Roads Organization, BRO, and the allocation of budgeted estimates 24-25 is rupees 6,500 CRs, which is a 30% higher than the allocation for financial year 23-24. And it stands at 160% higher over the allocation of FY 21-22. The financial provision made during the budget this year will, apart from promoting strategic infrastructural development in the border areas, that is going to boost the socio-economic development in that region along with promoting tourism. So the budget allocation for the Defense Research and Development Organization, that is the DRDO, has also been increased rupees 23,855 CR in financial year 24-25, being having a hike in the S&T, that is Science and Technology, as well as Research and Development, to rupees 23,263.89 CR in financial year 23-24. So of this allocation, a major share of rupees 13,208 crores is allocated for capital expenditure as well. That is a huge amount. And this will financially strengthen the DRDO in developing new technology with special focus on fundamental research and hand-holding the private parties through development come production partner. So the announcement regarding a rupees 1 lakh crore corpus for deep tech for long-term loan to tech-savvy youth companies and the tax advantage to the startups will give further impetus to innovation in the defense sector. That is the need of the hour, I would say. So the allocation to the Indian Coast Guard ICG for the financial year 24-25 stands at rupees 7,651.80 CRs, which is 6.31% higher over the allocation of financial year 23-24. So the allocation is going to facilitate the acquisition of fast-moving patrolling vehicles, interceptors, advanced electronic surveillance systems, and the weapons. So coming lastly to the total budgetary allocation on account of defense pensions, that stands at rupees 1,41,205 CRs, which is a 2.1% higher figure than the allocation made during 23-24. So summing up, we have seen a rise in budget allocation in the defense sector with a focus on research and development and innovation, a concerted effort towards capital allocation, and what seems to be a genuine step towards modernization through a greater push towards innovation and a focus on self-reliance, or we can say Atmanirbharta. That is the goal of our developed economy by 2047. So this year's defense budget accounts for around 1.89% of the country's projected gross domestic product, GDP, for 24-25. So this was just a brief overview how budget has been allocated particularly to the defense sector and its various components. And I hope to learn from this team gathering on the various aspects related to the budget. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bhanvi. Now, Samiran, would you like to say something?
Yeah. Thank you, Bhanvi, for your insightful presentation. The floor is now open for discussion with our esteemed experts. I extend a warm invitation to Dr. Laxman Behera, Associate Professor at the Special Center for National Security Studies, JNU, to initiate this deliberation. Over to you, Dr. Behera ji.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Samiran. So, how much time I have for my discussion?
Sir, around 10 minutes.
Okay.
Around
So, yeah. So, at the outset, I must thank. Shall I start? Yeah.
Yes, sure.
So, at the outset, I must thank IMPRI and particularly Dr. Kumar for organizing this event and having me here for today's discussion. I think Bhavani has already summarized the allocations. So I don't have to go into those figures, and figures are sometimes very boring. Although when we talk about budget, so I mean we should speak on facts and figures. But I think she has given a good overview of the allocations on the different heads. So what I would like to actually discuss is to just look at the strategic or the geopolitical or the security environment that India faces and whether these are where the latest allocation actually fits in. Now, I think this audience is well aware of the kind of security challenges we face both in our neighbors and beyond neighbors. I think to start with our immediate neighbor, that is China, which many people in fact say is the biggest strategic challenge for India's security, and for obvious reasons, because if you are having 50,000 troops sitting eye to eye, then the fact that the problems which started in 2020 with the Gulwan crisis has not been resolved, And if your army is actually sitting and protecting those borders facing the enemy, then the kind of challenges we are talking about is really serious. And Bhanvi has already talked about how much the government is actually increase the allocations for border infrastructure. And I think the government in the last 2, 3 years has done tremendously well on providing allocations for improving border infrastructure. So that is one aspect. So I think on one side we have China as a big threat, and there's an active threat. Now traditionally we have this Pakistan, which actually creates disturbances in our hinterland. But I think the Pakistan's threat has reduced to some extent as of now because of their own problem, and which I say problem of their own making. They have their own economic crisis, they have their own security crisis in Afghanistan, and recently also they had a major flare-up with Iran, but I think that has subsided. I think Pakistan will remain muted for some time. It doesn't have that economic capacity. It doesn't have that international standing, create a major disturbance in India. But we can't actually discount Pakistan because Pakistan has become a very strategic country, strategic place for China. And given China's CPEC, the biggest component of BRI being spent in Pakistan, so China would like to utilize or leverage Pakistan against India's interest. So I think that our security planners must take into account when we do a thorough planning. So beyond region, I think the world is actually getting into a serious kind of geopolitics. I think it started in Europe with Russian attack in Ukraine. So and then it has actually flared up in Middle East. So the biggest concern for Indian point of view is that if you look at India's strategic partnership, I think over the years, particularly after Modi government came to power, we have become very friendly to the US. And there is a reason because both the US and India they have a common concern in China, and China is a major factor why both the countries have actually forged a very strong defense, security, and strategic partnership. But the fact that the US is actually involved in a major way in two fronts, one is in the Ukraine and the second in the Middle East. So how much time, energy, and efforts US can devote to the Indo-Pacific to counter China, that becomes a concern for India. And so India has to obviously India can rely on US for certain intelligence and other support, but India has also been, I mean, these two wars have also affected India's national interest and security interest. Ukraine, because of that crisis, so Russia has not been able to supply certain components or parts or maybe the military equipment to India. So that is directly affecting our defense preparedness. And secondly, whatever we have actually signed with European countries or the American countries, and since those countries are involved in supporting Ukraine, so they are not actually able to provide the supplies in the time bound manner. So that is one aspect. So economically, as you know, the Red Sea has become a very hotspot, and that has a direct implication because a lot of our trade actually goes through that through Suez Canal, and so there are certain estimates, but it affects our trade in a major way because we have to take a detour to Cape of Good Hope, and that not only takes time but also money. And the fact that the Navy is deployed in a major way in Red Sea and Arabian Sea and east coast of Somalia, so that diverts Navy's attention from its core activity, building capacity to counter China in the Indian Ocean. So this is the kind of security environment we face. Now the question is whether the defense allocation is good enough. Obviously, 1 year's defense allocation cannot meet all your defense requirement. It has to be given over a period of time. I think Bhavni has given some figures, but if you look at the MOD budget is not an indicator because it includes pension and civil estimates, etc. But nonetheless, this gives a good barometer of how much we are actually spending over the years. So if you look at the 10 years figures, so in 2015-16, our budget was, MOD's budget was around less than 3 lakh crore. Now we have almost 6 lakh crore, over 6 lakh crore. So this is almost doubled. So in 10 years time, the MOD's expenditure has doubled. But whether that doubling of resources has actually gone into our defense preparedness, so that's a major point. Now, Bhavni actually talked about the defense pension. Defense pension, because of variety of reasons, because of the pay commission divisions, because of the war, we has actually gone up quite in a big way. So that has eaten up a lot of resources from the MOD's budget. And then pay and allowances. So if you exclude pension, so there is a major segment pay and allowances. So pay and allowances, pension together is more than 55% of our defense budget. If you add housing, food, ration, so I think it can go up to 60%. So if your 60% budget is actually gone for manpower, pay, pension, ration, food, etc., then very little is actually spent on the capability development of the modernization. So that is where we have to see whether whatever little money we are getting, whether the first is whether the amount of money that is being devoted to defense is enough. And the second question is whatever money the MOD is getting, whether they are spending efficiently. So even though MOD's budget has grown doubled in the last 10 years, but if you look at MOD's budget as a percentage of GDP or central government expenditure, you will see there is a continuous decline. So I think she talked about 1.98%. So now we have actually spending on defense as percent of GDP less than 2%. So 13% of central government expenditure, it used to be 17%. So in terms of country's wealth and resources, so I think there is a decline. Of course, I think this cannot, there is no straightforward answer because sometimes the government has a lot of budget or spends a lot of money, but a big portion actually goes into infrastructure development like this year or the previous year the government has done. Last year, out of 45 lakh crore of central government budget, so 10 lakh straight away went to infrastructure development. This time 11 lakh, more than 11 lakh crore. So that actually skews the ratio, but nonetheless, these are the key figures I thought I would highlight. So, the efficiency of utilization, I talked about the manpower cost. So if the manpower cost actually takes a lot of money, so we have to see how much money we are actually able to spend on modernization or procurement. Now, procurement budget, if you look at this year budget, this year, so I think they have got only 5 point, I think around 5% increase in the modernization budget. So that is the money which will be going for buying new equipment. So growth of it's only about 5.5%. Now, what is the rate of inflation? So rate of inflation is around 5%. So you have hardly any growth in the procurement. And defense equipment, the index of price index of defense equipment, defense is generally higher than the normal index. So virtually there is any growth or rather negative growth in modernization. Of course, the government has actually put up a very brave face saying that the money, the modernization budget will sustain the modernization, will promote Atmanirbharta. But we have to wait and watch how it is actually going to support this because we have a huge pipeline of projects waiting for government's approval and execution. So if the resources are in short supply, obviously there will be delays. Maybe some projects may be cancelled, and so those side effects we have to see. Now, having said that, so I think we have when we talk about defense budget, we can't actually ignore the Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. So self-reliance has two parts. One is your R&D and other is your manufacturing. Now, Avni talked about some 20,000 crore or 23,000 crore being given to DRDO. So that looks quite good. I mean, quite big, but they actually not big if you compare in terms of percentage of defense budget or percentage of GDP. So in fact, if you compare with the Ministry of Defense budget, it's hardly 4%. So with 4% of our defense budget going to R&D, so can a country like India can become self-reliant? That's the one question we have to ask. Second question, of course, whatever money DRD is getting is that organization spending it well? Now, DRDO has been under criticism for variety of reasons, but one valid reason is criticism is that the inefficiency or the mismanagement of projects. So, I mean, there is no dearth of discussion or debates of how the projects are delayed, then cost overruns. So I think the government is aware of that. There was a committee which was set up, which has submitted a report. Raghavan committee has come out with strong recommendations. I think for the first time, we'll have a Prime Minister-led Defense Technology Council. I think that will bring some sanctity of the projects that the government actually sanctions. Otherwise, we pay lip service in the name of self-plans. I mean, this is the slogan which we are following since independence, but I think we very often are not serious about self-plans. I think for the first time, we are seeing a kind of seriousness coming from the government. The Prime Minister, if that recommendation is actually implemented, the Prime Minister will head the committee, and obviously if you see, if the ISRO is doing well, one of the reason is that because of high level of political intervention or political supervision, where the Prime Minister heads that council. So I hope for the same will translate in here in DRDO. There are other issues, but I think because of the time shortages, I can't go into manufacturing. Of course, we have done. I mean, the government has done lot to make in India the Atmanirbhar and Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. But I think this is the time to go for serious to go on implementation. So implementation has been a little lagging, has been a laggard. So government has to actually come out with a strategy. So how to actually execute all these identified projects in a time-bound manner. It doesn't actually help if you actually identify a project and then takes 15 years to deliver. And 15 years is a long time. So we have to actually find out how quickly we can actually deliver projects. It not only helps the defense forces, but it also helps the Indian manufacturing, India's defense technology. So I think that with that, I'll stop. Maybe we can take up for a few questions during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Sir, I have
Thank
a
you so
question.
much.
Sir, can you please let us know how we as students should deal with the subject of defense economics? Like, what are the readings available? Like, as a beginner, how do we study the subject of defense acquisition,
Okay.
etc.?
Yeah, so I know because I was involved in defense economics. It started actually first time in IDSA, Institute for Defense Studies Analysis, which is now renamed as MP-IDSA. So we set up this defense economics and industry center way back in 2006. So if you go to that center's website, then you'll find a lot of actually materials since 2006-7. So if you just actually look at those materials and what are the topics that center actually looked at, and so you'll have a fair bit of idea of so what are the key issues of defense economics. So defense economics was actually set up to raise some hardcore questions because military, I mean, we respect our military because of the military we are actually standing high, and so we are secure, and everything else actually happens because we have a secure border. But sometimes we spend a lot of money. I think 6 lakh crore, even if it is a very small percentage of GDP or central government expenditure, nonetheless, it is a absolute terms, it is a quite big number. So that center was set up to ask hard questions. So how the money is spent, so whether there are better alternatives, whether this integration can actually help. The CDS is also partly related to defense economics. The first CDS talked about lot of rationalization, harmonization, synergy, integration. Ultimately, the aim was to actually to save money, so which can be better utilized in some other sectors. So I think and there are a lot of books. So I have written 2 books on defense economics. One is Defense Economy of India, and the other is Defense Industry. There are few monographs, there are a lot of issue briefs and policy briefs. So you go to that website and you'll find a lot of materials which will help you to have a grasp of the subject.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laxman Behera ji. Your views on the paradigms in India's security concerns in recent times, in the light of ongoing global security threats such as Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Palestine, and unrests in the neighborhood, and understanding the pattern of budget allocation and utilization by in the defense and security sector was really insightful. Thank you so much, sir, for your views. Now I request Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji to please take up the session ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Actually, the sound is going off, and for the sound. Let me switch this off.
Yes, ma'am, if you'll switch off the phone, yeah.
Yeah.
Ma'am, you are also logged in from another device, no?
Yeah, because I could not hear. I am trying to leave this. Yeah. The sound is going off and on, and sorry for this. I hope I'm audible because on my computer I find that the sound is going off and on, but I think you can hear me. right? Well, I'm not getting your answer. Anyway, I think I'm audible, because if I'm not audible, please raise your hand. Samreen, I can see you. Okay, so fine. Good.
Yes, ma'am. You're audible. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So first, let me thank IMPRI for inviting me to this panel discussion on defense foreign policy and the Indian interim union budget. And I want to especially thank Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, and the entire team at IMPRI for basically this wonderful work that they're doing in this 4th annual series of well, basically the deliberations and analysis of the union budget. Now, to begin first, let me remind you that this is an interim budget. In an interim, and this is an interim allocation of funds until India forms a new union government after the Lok Sabha elections of 2004, post which a full budget will be placed in both houses of parliament. And basically, it will be deliberated in July 2024. So major policy announcements that could burden the next government cannot be included in the interim budget. And according to the Code of Conduct of the Election Commission of India, it cannot include any significant schemes that may sway voters. Following the interim budget, the Parliament passes a vote on account, as we know, and this is actually on expenditure, and it's for 2 months, but it can be extended. Second, let me also state that while foreign policy per se does not figure in a budget, except for allocation to the Ministry of External Affairs under defined heads, there is much in the budget which actually deals with foreign policy. And of course, the most important is the defense budget. And this is because one of the most important objectives of any state's foreign policy is to maintain the state's sovereignty and integrity. And so therefore, a state's defense system is integrally linked to foreign policy. Further, apart from that, we do not, IR has increased so much, and foreign policy therefore includes trade, international trade. And so this should also be discussed here. FDI, import and export, foreign trade, taxes on foreign remittances, also basically FTAs, free trade areas, and their impact on export duties and import duties and manufacture in domestic manufacture. So therefore, basically there is an overall impact on the economy of international trade policies, and therefore the budget is also important, okay? Now here we can also add other things like, for instance, attracting foreign students, which would actually imply an increase in foreign exchange revenues, building domestic infrastructure for international tourism, easing pathways for foreign direct investment. All this can broadly come under the union budget and basically under foreign policy also. But in this discussion, I'm not going to take up these, and I'll focus mainly on the defense budget and certain areas of international trade. Now, needless to say, the interim budget includes projections for only a limited period of time, and the vote on account focuses especially on well, solely on expenditure, and can be approved by Parliament without the need for any kind of formal discussion. So therefore, we do not see too much of discussion in the media or in the X-handle regarding the interim period, but this interim budget is important, very important, because it's an indicator of future trends, which will be taken up once the new government is formed. Now, this interim budget, as has just been pointed out by Dr. Behera, comes at a time when basically there is a lot of global change going on, and well, there are global pressures on India too. But it also comes at the time when the BJP government is in an election mode, and it has promoted the slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat to Viksit Bharat by 2027 within the Amrit Kal of, well, 100 years since independence, that is 2047. The Prime Minister, in fact, projects that India will become a $5 trillion economy and third in the world in GDP, ranking after the US and China in the next few years. Now, all this has to be done in the context of course, the global scenario, which has been explained just now by Dr. Behera. There are two wars, international wars going on, both of which have the power to disrupt supply chains, especially in food and in the supply of petroleum, petroleum products, natural gas, and therefore basically affect the prices of these items and will cause a lot of disruptions also in international trade. Now, the budget also comes at a time when India is emerging as a global player, so much so that very uncharacteristically, it made a very confident early definitive statement in support of Israel after the Hamas terrorist attack of October 7th, 2023. But the consequence, one can see it as a consequence. One consequence of this is the attacks by the Houthi militants which support the Hamas, or right as such, attacks on Indian ships carrying petroleum to Indian ports. Now, so therefore, intentionally or unintentionally, you can be drawn into something, all right, as such, which we did not intend to. So given this kind of volatile situation, so given these circumstances, strategic spending is required on national security with a distinction between what I say, core defense and the whole of defense, which actually has just been kind of mentioned by Dr. Behera. The defense budget remains a critical barometer of India's security policies, and therefore it is heartening to see that although Foreign Finance Minister Sitharaman emphasized the importance of addressing the 4 key categories of impoverished women, youth, and farmers, keeping the country's election in mind, the Ministry of Defense got the highest allocation of 6.21 lakh crores, far above the allocation for the Ministry of Home Affairs, which was at 2.03 lakh crores, and the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, which was mentioned because farmers are there, which only got rupees 1.27 lakh crores. So basically, the defense budget is the highest, which basically shows the priority here. As I said, this is an indicator, and it basically shows priorities. Now, let us quickly take a look at the breakdown of the rupees 6.21 lakh crores, which has already been done actually by Manvi. Now, the defense budget seems to be in keeping with the volatile geopolitical scenario, India's national security needs, and India's ambitions for the future. Rupees 1.72 lakh crores is meant for capital expenditure, as has been pointed out. And this largely includes purchasing of new weapons, aircraft, warships, and other military hardware. And basically, these will be detailed later. Rupees 4.39 crores is set aside for revenue expenditure, which includes day-to-day expenditure, including pensions, etc. In the capital outlay of defense services, rupees 40,777 crores is set aside for aircraft and aero engines, and 62.343 crores for other equipment. There's an outlay of 23,800 crores for naval fleet, and 6,830 crores for dockyard projects. 6,500 crores has been earmarked to strengthen border infrastructure. Now, all this obviously shows basically which direction is India's defense policy, and of course, ergo, foreign policy. Now, what is also important is the border. And so here, in fact, we find borders, etc. But most important today is basically innovation. And here we find, well, some lacunae. While the Coast Guard, the border, etc., they've got a lot of money, but the budgetary allocation for the DRDO is 23,855 crores, and I'll discuss this later. The one innovation is the rupees 1 lakh crore corpus, which has been set aside for deep technology for long-term loans to startups. And this too, I will discuss, take it up later. Now, taken together, the defense budget saw only a modest hike of 4.7% over the financial year 23-24 budgetary estimates, and actually goes into negative if the revised estimate is taken into account. And as a percentage of GDP, the allocation, as has been pointed out, it remains below 2%, although defense experts have wanted it at around 3%. Further, as also been pointed out, a large portion goes into, well, basically not the core defense area. This has been mentioned around 60%, but let me just give you the breakdown and count it. Revenue expenditure is 14.82%, salaries and allocation 30.68%, defense pension 22.72%, and basically civil organization under the MOD 4.11%. That is a total of 72.33%, which is not core defense. Now that is the major part. Now under capital allocation head, that is basically the capex account, which caters to the modernization of the country's arsenal, defense was given 1.72 lakh crores, or actually 27.67% of the total defense budget. Now most modern militaries spend about 50 to 60% of the total defense budget on the capital account to ensure that the armed forces are combat ready with the latest equipment. India's defense budget shows that the Indian military forces continue to be personnel heavy, with the defense budget being largely sucked up by salaries, pensions, ex-servicemen's welfare schemes, etc. Now, having said that, it is important to take a look at what the capital expenditure allocation is earmarked for. The allocation of 1.72 lakhs includes the acquisition of new military platforms in line with the long-term integrated perspective plan, aiming at filling critical and credibility gaps of all three sectors of the armed forces. This includes planned modernization of the existing Sukhoi 30 fleet, along with additional procurement of aircraft, advanced engines for existing MiG-29s, acquisition of transport aircraft C-295, as well as missile systems. Further, the Make in India initiative will be taken forward even more by basically adding more funds to the to the LCA MK1 to ensure state-of-the-art technology in basically indigenous defense production. Now, this is a lot of things for a little bit of money. Now, what is heartening is the attention that is being paid to infrastructure, the Coast Guard, and the Navy, because our threats are perceptible, especially in our western, northern, northeastern borders, and increasingly in the Indian Ocean and along our coast, especially because China is extending its basically Navy into the Indian Ocean. And so therefore, one really has to look into that. Now, the capital budget allocation for the Border Roads Organization is 6,500 crores, which is 30% higher than the allocation for the last year, 23-24. Projects such as the development of the highest airfield in Ladakh at an altitude of 13,700 feet, permanent bridge connectivity to the southernmost panchayat of India in Andaman Nicobar, a 4.1 kilometer strategically important Sinkhula tunnel in Himachal Pradesh, also another one in Andhra Pradesh, the Nechipu tunnel, and many other projects basically will come from this allocation. Of the 7.6 crore allocated to the Indian Coast Guard, and this is heartening, 3.5 actually is for capex, for capital expenditure, which is actually needed because we have to address emerging challenges in water, providing for acquisition of basically fast-moving patrolling vehicles and interceptors, advanced electronic surveillance, and weapons. Now, in modern-day warfare, expenditure in innovation is a must, and this is where India has lagged behind because India has the brains, but it does not have the money or does not put in the money for that kind of innovation. Basically, with the vision statement of Atmanirbhar Bharat and Viksit Bharat in mind, there is some attempt in the 25 budget, the interim budget. So let's hope there'll be more to basically cover this area. Although, if one may say this, clarity is lacking. The budgetary allocation for DRDO has been increased very marginally from 23.2 crores in the last year's budget, that is the 23-24 financial year, to 23.8. Now, which means basically a 0.6, all right, increase in the budget, which is actually nothing when you look into basically increasing costs and prices. So this is really not too much. Now, of this, 13.2 crores is allocated for capital expenditure with special focus on fundamental research and hand-holding of private partners through development come production partnership. Now, this is important because we need to bring in the private sector into also innovative production. But so far as innovative research is concerned, it's more academia and of course the DRDO and places like that, because industry after all produces, the link between research and innovation is there in the US or in even Israel, but we don't still see that link over here in this country. Now, basically, development come production partnership is a very good idea if it takes off. Now, rupees 60 crores is set aside for startups, MSMEs, and the academia to attract young, bright minds. Now, this also is good, but it has its problems, which I'll just point out. And of course, there is the announcement of rupees 1 lakh crore for deep tech for long-term loan to tech-savvy youth or to startups, young startups, and tax advantages to startups to give impetus to innovation in deep technology defense research. Now, how many of us understand deep technology defense research or deep technology research? The opposite is shallow technology, and this is deep technology. Now, basically, one must understand what it's all about, and there is so much of debate today about deep technology, and so this is something that we must figure in. Now, deep tech refers to technology based on artificial intelligence, that is AI, machine learning, or other emerging technologies like blockchain, computer imagery, and virtual reality, which uses simulation to enable interaction with a 3D or other sensory environment. Deep tech in defense has helped, in fact, the US, Israel, China, and other countries, in fact, to evolve advanced defense technology. However, this is futuristic. And how far this kind of technological innovation in defense particularly can be left to unmonitored young minds or startups remains to be seen. Now, the concept, however, sounds very good, and especially basically the fact that the government is thinking of young, bright minds, which will keep them in India and basically make them work here, is really good. But whether deep tech should be left to micro or small startups is debatable, because deep tech is expensive. It needs manpower, and basically it needs sustained research. Further, such technologies can be disruptive, as has been pointed out, AI and all that, and basically need constant monitoring and surveillance. I'd like to add a bit about trade and investment before I end, since foreign policy covers, as I said, not only the country's defense, but especially in an increased, incrementally interconnected world, the country's economy. India's path to growth lies in prioritizing exports to global markets, which are vast compared to domestic markets. The government's ambitious target of exporting goods and services worth about $2 trillion by 2030 is praiseworthy. But if we really look at figures, till October 2023, India's overall merchandise exports had declined 5.5% year on year. Okay. Now, this happened partly because, and here, in fact, foreign policy comes in, and that is why I'm mentioning this. This happened partly because within the average for most favored nation tariff is about 9.7%, and basically there is a relative absence of free trade areas compared to countries like Vietnam, all right, the whole of Southeast Asia for that matter. India imposes the highest tariffs among prominent developing countries. High tariff on imports result in basically costlier imports and reduces the competitiveness of downstream Indian exports in international markets. Further, there are certain complexities in our trade policies that basically impact international trade and transactions and supply chain dynamics. Notably, there is the inverted duty structure, which has been basically undermining the competitiveness and profitability of domestic industries. An inverted duty structure is characterized by high import duties on raw materials than on finished products. Industries like engineering goods, textiles, leather are particularly affected. A pivotal element in this is India's free trade agreements with various nations. I talked about free trade area, not free trade agreements. There are quite a few free trade agreements, okay? Now, these which exist create another kind of problem. To fortify trade relations, some of these countries are given total exemptions, allowing duty-free import of finished goods, which pose challenges for domestic manufacturers. Now, what is needed is a re-evaluation of supply chain dynamics, sourcing strategies, and cost structures, especially those dependent on imported raw materials and components to diminish capital costs and expenses. Indian exporters basically need to basically compete more robustly in the global platform, and this is not really happening. Also, what you find is there are many countries, small countries like South Korea, which have their own brands, okay, which sell internationally. Now, when it comes to India, we are making components for many of these brands. But can you talk about what, for instance, many use the Xiaomi phone, the MI phone and all that. Now, what kind of phone do we have? All right, we are buying all these, all right, but are we exporting our own brand, all right, as such, of electronic goods or anything like that? So basically, what I see is that basically we need to rethink about basically innovation also in industry, where we can create brands in the international market which will sell. Basically, if you're thinking in terms of global market and to become competitive, we need to be competitive in many things, all right? Not just say basically an Indian brand of tea, which is quite expensive, but even things like what, apparel, do we have a Gucci or do we have any such kind of brand? We have Sabyasachi, which Indians wear, but it's Indian wear. All right, so we need to also look at the Indian, the global market when you're thinking in terms of foreign policy. Okay, so branding is very important. Okay, now in the modern market. Now, basically, we need to diminish capital costs and empower Indian exporters to compete more robustly, therefore, in the global market. Now, while it was not expected that all this would be dealt with in the interim budget, it is important to mention this here because economists have expressed concern about the sustainability of India's strong economic growth, citing high employment. In fact, what they talk about is jobless growth and a slow manufacturing sector, and basically a sluggish consumption rates. Now, while the Indian economy has grown at the fastest pace for any major economy in the last 2 years, many prominent economists and analysts have flagged rising disparities in the economy, calling it K-shaped growth, wherein basically certain sectors of the economy have witnessed robust expansion while others persist in a downward trajectory, something like the letter K. Now, the government, of course, has rubbished this K. In fact, the finance minister in a recent interview talked about, all these kind of letter K-shaped, L-shaped or whatever, which means basically, it's not taking it seriously. But basically, if India wants to be a 5 trillion, and they keep on flagging this, that India is going to be a 5 trillion economy by 2027. It is true that the GDP will probably reach the 5 trillion level even before 2027, sometimes. But there are certain parameters that the government needs to look into when the full budget is drafted. Some of this I've already talked about, where we talk about basically free trade agreements, free trade areas, and how these affect domestic markets, and basically our competition in the global market. But there's another thing I want to point out, that is basically the rupee. Now, India is trying to turn the rupee into a global currency, which will reduce its dependence on the dollar and increase India's heft. Now, India basically, Russia has agreed to sell oil in Indian rupees. So this is an important thing, okay? But what we need to do, or India needs to do, is strengthen the rupee against the dollar, making it basically a stable currency internationally. This will also help to attract foreign direct investment. Investors will keep their money in Indian assets, if the currency is stable and bond yields are high. Reforms like easier rules for foreign investors, simplified tax structures, strong bankruptcy laws have helped draw in FDI. But basically, entrenched problems like, for instance, excessive red tape still obstruct FDI. A self-sufficient India does not mean an isolated India, but a country that is linked to the external world through friendly diplomatic, economic, and security ties. The interim budget is only an indicator. However, it is hoped that the full budget in July 2024 will review allocations based on a re-evaluation of defense and trade policies, needs, and priorities for sustainable growth and a stronger India in a world where power relations are rapidly changing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji. Your views on global scenario and India's security and defense paradigms. Your analysis of the budget with respect to the important sectors in the defense and security sector in the light of new emerging technologies, the dynamics of deep technology, and future prospects in research, particularly in defense and security, and the way you told us about the intricacies between defense and security as well as global trade and Indian economy was really very insightful. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your deliberation. I now request Major General Dr. K Chakravorty ji to please take up the session forward. Over to you, Doc. Over to you, Major General.
Oh, thank you very much, Samiran. And all that I would say is that I have, with great respect, firstly to Dr. Simi Mehta and Professor Dr. Arjun, I'm grateful that you called me for this. And I would not like to just repeat the figures which have already been given by the introductory speaker, followed by Dr. Laxman Behera and Professor Sanjukta. I'll just straight away come on to the actuals. Now, when you look at the defense budget, one thing is very clear that it's an interim budget, but it's only 4.72% more than the last budget. Now, the inflation for the year 2023 was 5.4%. That means all that you have done is you have reduced the defense budget. Now, that is the first issue which must hit all of us. The second, it's nice to say, all these terms, they are nice, but when you come to the battlefield and when you have to actually carry out operations, you need numbers in manpower, numbers in equipment. You cannot do without it. Now, we already have artificial intelligence. I myself have commanded a brigade of drones, and this is 20 years ago. Drones are artificial intelligence. We have it in our army, our navy, our air force. So we are already in the field of artificial intelligence. I just have visited startups. You'll be amazed how these startups, I'm talking not of MSMEs, but startups, how amazing they are and how they are able to get the best technologies, which are state of the art. I visited one of them. I'll name you also, Big Bang Technologies in Chennai. They have been able to form counter-drone methods. They can ensure that they can tell you that this is the drone which has taken off right now from this location, and you can carry out counter methods. So, having worked very closely with the DRDO and being a practitioner, let me tell you, unless you involve the private sector, unless you involve the people who are today in these startups and who are really going to provide you technology, you're going to get very little that you can with the budget you have. Now, as it stands right now, the interim budget, our defense budget is 1.89% of the GDP. Now, last year, I came in the same discussion, and I have my notes of last year also. And I want to be very simple in the figures, because what happens is that we get very much this thing. Last year when I came, I brought out the same point that even the parliamentary committee has said that we should be minimum 2.5% of the GDP. To give crores or to give dollars is no indication. See, after all, you have progressed. Once you progress, everything is related to the GDP you are in. This includes everything, the price of your vegetables, the price of a bus ticket. Now, if you make ladies free, the bus ticket automatically for the gents goes up. Now, these are all very natural things. After all, nobody can pay for that ladies ticket. The same way, as far as the business of arms is concerned, very rightly brought out by the previous speakers. Now we have the Ukraine, you can call it Russia calls it special operations, you can call it a war, the Ukraine war going on. Then you've got also the Hamas conflict, which has started from October 7th, immense amount. And to add to it, now you've got Iran into the battlefield, number of attacks taking place in both Iraq, Syria, and the Houthis, who are basically an asymmetric force, are today creating a lot of problems in the Indian Ocean, or rather, I would say, in the Arabian Sea. Now, keeping all this, the cost also goes up. Moment you start using defense equipment, what was applicable last year is not applicable today. I mean, say it's exactly, and having dealt with actually procuring equipment, I can tell you these figures sound very nice, but overall they are really very little, and something must be done. Now, what do we do? Every year I keep saying the same time. Last time Professor Swaran Singh was here for the debate, and I used two words. What do the defense forces do when they are given a budget like this? Well, they have only two things to do: prioritization and innovation. There's nothing else that you can do. You prioritize, you do something. You got today 50,000 troops which are deployed against China. I want to be very clear. And today, I mean, the 50,000 troops in these conditions with the correct equipment, if they have to be sustained, there is no way we can today reduce manpower. You can bring in artificial intelligence, you can bring in drones, but manpower reduction means you've got to realize that your grand strategy has to change. Can we say that we will replace defense by diplomacy? Or is diplomacy the answer to everything that goes on? Certainly not. I mean to say, I have been a diplomat myself. I mean, say, being a military diplomat. And I can tell you that all these words are nice theoretically, but when you come to practically on ground, you have to match a force structure with a force structure. If there's a division, you have to match with the division. A brigade has to be matched with a brigade. A squadron has to be matched with a squadron. Let's take today, I mean, say any of the services. I mean, say take the Air Force. Their chief himself has said, we just have about a little more than 30 plus squadrons. Our requirement is 45. So despite what you may say or say just an interim budget, the point it is pointing out to is that overall, you are just leaving it entirely, shall I say, to the manpower who today are in these services to undertake tasks, and you are not giving them the scope of equipment which is required both in numbers and in quality. Now, Atmanirbharta. Now, does Atmanirbharta mean that it is the solution for everything? Atmanirbharta is an issue which is going on, believe me, right from the day we became independent. I mean, say Gandhiji had the chakra and he also used to make his own cloth. But you would agree that cloth was not sufficient for him. The khadi which he spun was not even sufficient for Vardha ashram in which he was. So similarly, all these issues we take into account. But at the same time, when we need, say, 126 Rafales, we have to settle for 36 Rafales. So the number we are settling for is, say, today, we want Guardian UAVs from the United States, 31 Guardian UAVs. It takes a long time for anything to come from abroad. And at the same time, we are trying our best to manufacture a lot of drones, but they certainly are not the ones which would cater for everything. Let's take an Indian diet itself. I mean, so you can go to any part of India, with the north, south, or something. You have a starter. You have today something which is your staple diet, which could be rice and chapatis, or idli and dosa, or uttappam. And then you end up with finally something which is a midpoint, let's say curd rice. And then you end up with a fruit or a sweet dish. Now, we can't have today everything being manufactured on the battlefield. The requirements are so diverse. The domains have also increased. We just don't look at only these two wars. Today we have got the space domain coming. We have got the cyber domain coming. Everything that we are fighting cyber wars without knowing that we are fighting. Right now, even whatever you are transmitting may be already being viewed in China and Pakistan. So this is the cyber strength today. So today, cyber AI, artificial intelligence, and along with it, the improvement, which is quantum, has become extremely important. All these needs much more money than what has been allotted. I would very frankly state, I am well aware, and I would not like to, I've got all these figures which have been quoted by the speakers, and would not like to repeat them because figures by themselves mean very little. So what we have to do is keep on prioritizing, leave out some things, keep some things, and that's what we have been doing. But if you today even become a $5 trillion economy, economies can only survive with security. If you don't have the security, and if you have China as they are today, you're having China becoming a great friend of Maldives. Look at the amount of problems we are going to have. We already have problems in the Arabian Sea. Maldives adds to it. Okay, so when I'm saying all this needs to be countered. Diplomatically, our government, our prime minister is doing his best. But despite all this, we must understand that security is extremely important. Now, the point which I would like to also bring out is the issue of certain things which are very difficult. We have decided to make Neoma as an airfield, as a high altitude airfield. Now I've been at Neoma. Or we have decided so many strategic roads to be built. We have seen the Silkyara tunnel. All these, the Himalayas are very new mountains. Very new in the sense, if you take the Deccan Plateau, where I must give you a comparison which you can understand. If you take the Deccan Plateau, you got hard rocks. Very easy to build, drill tunnels because nothing falls. The Himalayas, you today, we have built the railway, just railway line from Jammu to Udhampur to Katra on to Riyasi, now the bridge has been made across the Chenab. It'll take another few years for the bridge, though it's constructed, to get its clearance. Then we've got tunnels at Banihal and tunnels at other places. All these tunnels, they have to be checked for safety. So therefore, defending the borders is definitely needs money. It's not only human beings can go there. Human beings need to be correctly equipped. They have to have the correct weapons. They have to have roads that lead these problems. And then they have to be fed and kept in a condition that they are able to do it. Now, can we substitute them by, say, robots or something? I think it's a far-fetched imagination. Because even if robots are going to come in, let's say the Chinese army is getting in robots, the US is getting in robots. Two, you can say, okay, we put, the robots will be matching robots, but humans will still be needed. I have been to these startups and they are a great thing. But don't forget, you're not the only one with startups. If today you are progressing, so is Germany progressing, so is China progressing, so is US progressing. So our progresses cannot be just pegged at purely reaching a benchmark, saying that we will reach this and we have become this. It is a relative progress. I think the most important theory which has been made is Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Unless you can relatively compare between X and Y, it's very difficult. That's why I say I do not speak in terms of crores, I speak in percentages of GDP, because that tells you where you are. After all, we cannot today carry the, let's say, even if you go 5 years back, I cannot carry the same weapon. I got the Bofors gun into India, introduced BrahMos missiles. But let me tell you, they are all finding their way out. Technology moves fast. It moves so fast that you cannot even decide. By the time you introduce a weapon, already it is reaching the stage of obsolescence. Now, how do you, from our side, what do we do? From our side, agreed. Atmanirbhar, let me tell you now, let me give you some examples of Atmanirbhar as far as the US is concerned. I carried out a deep research of two companies, Boeing and Apple. I was surprised that Apple, 85% of the components are made in China. We have opened two factories of Apple, one in, I think, Hosur and one near Chennai. Believe me, most of the components are coming from China. Boeing, the Boeing aircraft, basically, except for the engine, most of the components, 80 to 85%, are made in China. Now, these are American companies. America also says that we don't have any, equipment in the American army except it, unless it's American. Just remember that. Now, if you say that you have got an Apple iPad or you got a Dell computer, they are basically Chinese products. I was surprised that even South Korea is getting bulk of it, and Japan, they are getting bulk of their components from China. China really today has become the factory of the world. Now we are to compete with China, where today they have built so many airfields in Tibet. And it's not going to be a war like we visualize, where it is person to person, force on force. As I said, cyber, AI, they are going to play very critical roles. You're also going to have now ships, and the subsurfaces of the sea is going to become extremely important. I'm not painting a scenario which is what you call a futuristic. The current scenario, if you take, China has got the maximum underwater vehicles. So today, even if you use submarines with underwater vehicles, in which field we have made very little progress. The deep technologies which we are talking are deep for India, but certainly not deep for China or for the US. But we have to make progress, and we have to understand for all this, you need budgeting. The budget, as a matter of fact, be it an interim budget, be it a final budget, it gives you the outline of where you're going to go. It's like today a family ultimately looking at the pay which the father is getting. Of course, today women have also started earning. How much pay has he got? And then they decide what we can do with it. How much will be spent on schooling? How much will be spent on the same way? As far as the budget is concerned, it tells you your strategy, your grand strategy. Having written on so much on these subjects and still writing and encouraging people to write, all I can say is, without a budget, whether it's interim, whether it's final, we can do nothing in the armed forces. Now, what else can we think of our DRDO? Now, well, we have been doing our best to make the DRDO effective. And definitely, a great thing is both for the government and the DRDO themselves, they have started privatizing. They have started involving people who are basically from the startups. And I think the results have been really good, and they were being contributed a lot to our thing. When you look at it today, bulk of the equipment of the armed forces is indigenous. Let's take the Tejas. The Tejas is going to be the main fighter for the Air Force. Let's take our tanks. Bulk of the T-90s are being made in India. Even if you take the other guns which we have got, let's take the K9 Vajra, which was bought for the planes and now was landed in the high altitude, is basically a South Korean equipment, but today being manufactured in India. I'm giving a major. Similarly, our ships, bulk of the ships, though with foreign collaboration, are being made in India. So while the bulk comes from there, yet we will have to get something from it. This must be clear in our mind. Like say today we are going to get for the aircraft carrier, the Rafale aircrafts. Now, these 29 Rafales which they are planning to buy for the new aircraft carrier certainly will involve about $3 billion. Now, when I don't want to convert them in lakh crores, because then it will become again the numbers will get, I think, moment you convert it into, Indian rupees, it becomes a little difficult and it becomes a little tricky but I would give you more in percentages and dollars. So now when you get just 29 aircraft, you're going to spend $3 billion. Now, so all equipment needs money. But overall, when you look at your budget, it is just about $73 billion, which is really nothing compared to a China budget, which anybody will say that it is 250. They say 250. It's anything between 350. Look at the US budget, $650 billion. Where are we? Next, we are talking about pensions. If we don't give people pension, how do they join the armed forces? On what rationale are you going to leave a man at the age of 35 and tell him, please go to the open streets? Will anybody accept him? And what is his qualification? There's nothing. The military qualification, I'm talking particularly for the army, which is the bulk, which includes about almost a million people. And say today you've got about 32 lakh pensioners. The Air Force strength is about a little above a lakh. Navy is less than a lakh. So the army person, when he goes out, if he doesn't have a pension, what does he do? Certainly, the armed forces, you can see today, whenever I land abroad in the US, every airport has a thank you sign to their heroes who are struggling and who are fighting for them. Believe me or not, you come out of the airport and the first thing is, welcome our heroes from the armed forces. Now, that is the spirit. I'm not talking of China or Vietnam, which I've been. I'm talking of a democratic country. I'm talking of a country which looks after its veterans. And therefore, you have to spend money on pensions. I'm glad that they have increased the money on ECHS. So I would like to now just say one or two more things about the improvement of technology. Now, improvement of technology also means improvement of manpower who can deal with this technology. Today, an infantry battalion has got radars. It has got anti-tank guided missiles. It has got unmanned aerial vehicles. It has got laptops. And the qualification of the soldier is 10th class. We are not even 12th. I'm repeating it. It is class 10. So if that is the qualification, I have seen many people who are postgraduates when they are given these items. I've seen scientists at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore and IIT Kanpur, finding it difficult to deal with these things. We are making our people deal with this. We are firing the BrahMos missile with these boys. So therefore, there couldn't be greater innovation, you would agree, that in terms of academic qualification, we take a person at that level and we are firing a supersonic cruise missile. And they are doing it with all silence. So therefore, the least I would say is whatever it is, you have to pay them. You have to give them pension. None of the missiles can be fired on their own. There's no missile in the world which I know of which takes off on its own. I've seen practically all the armies in the world. So I'm talking to you as a practitioner. I'm not talking to you from books, from paragraphs, or from sentences told by some scientist somewhere. Because when we go into the practicalities of it, often American equipment fail in our country. The rest fail in our country. So technology means also the manpower has to be raised. And if you want some manpower to be raised, that manpower which is seeing such conditions, and let me also put it, I think Dr. Behera very correctly brought out the situation. We have borders which are very tough. We have got an insurgent situation. He also brought out the situation, how the Ukraine war has impacted. All this will tell you that our soldiers have to be prepared and vigilant. I would only add to that just remember that cyber war is a continuous process. It's going on. So therefore, cyber, AI, These are going on at all times. We live in what is known as a gray zone. And a gray zone means it's an area between war and between peace. I don't think there's peace at all in the entire South Asian continent. Nobody can say that this area is under peace. We live in a gray zone, and in this gray zone, which is an American term definitely, but even the Chinese are using it, so I'm using this term. I'd like to thank you all, and time doesn't permit me to go beyond this, and I would like to end my talk. Any questions? I'm prepared to take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Major General Dr. K Chakravorty ji. Your views on the dynamic nature of arms procurement, uh, how a strong economy needs to have a strong and resilient security system, how important projects of important national security have been going on all over the country and they need to be protected, particularly at the borders. Most importantly, your first-hand experiences of rigorous research, your analysis of the China factor, current prospects in defense equipment procurement, nuances of technology, and the increased domains of security in form of cyber security, AI, and the increased domains of space and maritime domains was really insightful. Thank you so much, sir. I now request Mr. Robinder N Sachdev ji to please take over the session.
Thank you so much. I had sent a PPT, if you could kindly share, a simple PPT. Thank you so much. And thanks to IMPRI and the team, Dr. Kumar, Dr. Simi, Mehta, and the eminent panelists and the brilliant ignited minds in this discussion. Okay, I think a lot has been covered itself, but maybe I've similarly put things from a slightly different and going into numbers and absolutely, to what our my esteemed colleagues before we have highlighted, Dr. Behera, Professor Sanjukta, and General Chaudhary right now. But let's say, and my numbers are approximations. I've used approximations because it seems to me that sometimes it's easier to get a message across if you use rounded approximate numbers, rather than very exact, because we are trying to convey a big picture. So let's say our budget defense is about $75.34 billion converting into dollars, right? $75 billion. General Chakravorty just mentioned China's official defense budget is said to be around $250 billion. The Heritage Foundation, in a September study, according to them, the unofficial budget of China is $700 billion. They're, of course, throwing in a lot more into what, China's spendings are and how it allocates. So, we do not know, but broadly, those could be, aspects. And the US defense budget is, let's say, around $900 billion. So talking of numbers, that's where we are. We are 1/12 of America's budget. We are it depends, 1/4 to 1/10 of China's defense budget preparations. That's where we are. The reality, as I think all our colleagues before me have mentioned, it's about the money that we have. Next, please. So now there is definitely a lot of talk about, India, 5 trillion economy, 10 trillion economy, numbers being thrown left, right, and center. I took a simple model, assuming a 7% growth of our GDP. If we grow at a 7% GDP, we will hit a 5 trillion not before 27, 28. Okay. And we will not hit a 10 trillion before 2037, 38 at a 7% growth. So, various talks which are going on, India will shortly be a 10 trillion economy by 2030, 32. No, the numbers don't show it. So that's the reality we have. Now, in terms of a defense budget, yes, 1.89, again, rounding up to 2 and assuming it stays 2 and assuming we can push to 2%. Okay, $75 billion now. When we are a 5 trillion economy, our defense budget, if it stays at 2, will be 105 billion. When we are a 10 trillion economy, then our budget will be over $192 billion, right? CapEx, the actual money spent in procurements. In this present budget, my estimate, I think it's around $21 billion. When we are a 5 trillion economy, then maybe we'll be spending $28 billion. When we are a $10 trillion economy, maybe we'll be spending $50 trillion on pure procurement of hardware, more or less. So it means that India will spend capex in the present terms between $21 to $32 billion up till the year 2030, or if I were to accumulate it all, in the next 6 or 7 years, we are going to be spending about $250 billion of defense purchases. Big picture. Next, please. Now, some lessons to incorporate in budget planning, especially with the experience of the past 2 wars. One thing which struck me, Israel has a defense budget of about $25 billion and gets an annual aid from the US for military about 3.9 or 4. So it adds up to about $29 billion every year Israel has, right? Soon as the Hamas war, if you were to say, broke out, within weeks, it was estimated that Israel needs an aid package of $14 billion, which Biden is still trying to get through the hill. $14 billion is about 50% of Israel's annual budget. So does it mean that as and when any war breaks out, a nation needs 50% of the annual defense allocation kept aside as a contingency money? You need that, apparently, it seems. Similarly, ammunitions. Within 2 days of the Hamas war, US planes were coming in, cargo transport with the interceptors for the Iron Dome systems. Ever since then, every day, 3, 4 more US planes are coming in with ammunition cargo. Ammunition, our stocks of ammunition is a key thing, I think. And ammunition, I'll go deeper into more. Looking at the example of Ukraine, NATO and all, and again, Ukraine needs ammunition like anything, other than the long distance weaponry. Keep aside the weaponry. Let's look at ammunition only, right? America has been able to supply the Javelin and Stingers and all, 155 mm, etc. The NATO countries are supplying. All of these countries, the US and NATO, are running short on their own inventory for their own needs because they've been supplying to Ukraine. Similarly, with respect to Israel, Israel is needing ammunitions. US and NATO are trying to supply down. What US did to aid Ukraine with munitions, see, US has been an exporter. So when there are US weapons and munitions in Germany, stocked in Korea, stocked in Italy, Hungary, wherever, etc., US could pull or draw up on that resource that, okay, fine, maybe 10,000 155 mm shells are in Italy. Boom. Those were what America had exported. The point I'm trying to make here is that as a defense strategy, defense industry strategy for our country, and for another key reason I'll come to, we need to export. Not only to export to earn dollars in the market, but we need to export to friendly countries so that tomorrow when a war breaks out in India, we have our own stocks, yes, but we can quickly call upon the stocks in a friendly country which we have supplied earlier over the years so that we can fulfill or keep our inventory going. The other key reason I think we need to export is that, and this has come up and the question was on defense economics, the defense industry in India, especially to involve the private sector, faces a single buyer problem. There is only one buyer, the government of India, the Ministry of Defense, right? Now, let's say if I'm a private sector player and I developed a missile, I spent years of investment, innovation, manpower, infrastructure, whatever, and I develop a missile. It is tested. Four private companies, let's say in India, develop this missile system. Only one will be taken up and go for the procurement. What happens to the investments of the other 3 private players, right, who have set up the capabilities and infrastructure? So in order for the market size to grow, or rather, let's say the number of buyers to grow, we need to export so that our private sector, who is bound only by the one buyer, the Defense Ministry of India, has other potential buyers. So its investments into its infrastructure, R&D, product development and all do not go a total waste. Next, please. Now, one aspect, again, going deeper into the issue of, how the munitions and the world of today and the conflicts, as we all are mentioning and talking about the Ukraine war, the Hamas war, Taiwan, and emerging South China. India does have an opportunity to be the ordnance factory of the world, especially of the US and the NATO bloc. As I think a speaker before me was mentioning, Boeing's America's defense industry base has atrophied. It has hollowed out. Yes, America has some large contractors, about a dozen or so, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Atomics, whoever it would be, about a dozen or so. But beyond that, America's industrial manufacturing base for defense has atrophied. And a lot of it has been, of course, outsourced to other countries, including to China. Now, America is in a problem. America needs to restock its stock of Javelin, Stingers, 155 etc. for its own minimum inventory level, MOQ, minimum order quantity, let's say. The NATO countries are running short, all of them. Ukraine is demanding more. Here, Israel is demanding more and getting some. There, Taiwan is demanding more and getting some and wanting some to, beef up its defenses against a potential China conflict. And lastly, America needs itself more to, weaponize itself more, to upgrade its facilities in Guam, more structures, more, air defense and all, to prepare for a conflict with China. All this shows and means that the next 10 odd years, of course, America is trying to increase capacity. Europeans also realizing they're all looking to figure out how to, revitalize their capacities, industrial, and the talent to work on those. So in the next 10 odd years, there's a huge need for defense supplies in the world. Now, just as, in a way, America helped China to become an economic, let's say, super growth country, and America got China to be its factory for, shoes, clothes, consumer goods, whatever, right? America now needs a factory for defense production. India could fill that role, potentially, if we go with that mindset, right? And also, by the way, one key reason for the tech transfers, the technology transfers, which are kind of seemingly more on the horizon with the US and also with Europe, is that US realizes, of course, strategic relations and multiple aspects, that if US tech, if there is technology transfer to India, sure, India will manufacture items for its domestic needs, our own domestic needs. But as India's industrial base grows, India could be a supplier to the US and to Europe. So that's one other key reason due to which, technology transfer regimes are being looked at more positively by America and Europe with respect to India. Now, if India can leverage this opportunity, given the various aspects, ease of doing business and whatsoever we may say, our own innovation ecosystem, industrial, vendor system, ecosystem, supply chains and all, we could be the ordnance factory. If not the ordnance factory, we could definitely be a large producer, production base of defense goods in the country. Next, please. So some other observations, I think probably, especially I'm looking at the current, and even if you look at some earlier phase of history, short wars might be an illusion. Any war, it seems, whatsoever kind of your adversary, if here superpower Russia could not, have a short war with Ukraine, supposedly a pygmy, and there Israel, a superpower in its own right, the most advanced, the perception is, right? It could not, achieve its, it could not keep its own country safe and achieve any of its military objectives against a ragtag assembly of Hamas. Houthi rebels, pajama wearing, sandal wearing, no helmet, no high tech. Okay. So wars may not necessarily be short. So you're going to, if getting into a war, have to be prepared for a long term. The 100,000 crore R&D fund, which I think has been mentioned by my earlier esteemed colleagues in the budget, I think definitely is a good step, because though it's meant as an overarching deep tech fund and all, one assumes a big portion or some portion of it would be of course applicable to the defense industry and the defense industrial complex, and it will benefit the defense industry very much. Here I anticipate, 1 lakh crore is a big number, and 50-year long-term loans that they're talking at zero maybe interest. This would mean large infrastructures being set up. Maybe not, small 5 crores given to startups to, get deeper into deep tech. This means, and big money is needed, as all our esteemed colleagues have said before me. You need to have huge labs, you need to have huge talent working. So probably that is I think that is the vision of this fund. to enable the creation of such large infrastructures with private participation. And yes, as mentioned earlier, technology is changing very, very fast. We were talking about drones, and right now, drones are in huge demand worldwide. Drones. But you know what? Drones are also becoming a commodity, because it's the AI or the software or the platform or the network communication, electronic jamming, etc., that you can layer onto the physical drone. The drone otherwise is becoming a commodity, right? A 1 kilo drone, a 5 kilogram drone, a 20 kilogram drone, 200 kilogram drone. It depends upon how you arsenalize, weaponize the drone. Next, please. Now that was defense. Now a few thoughts on the MEA budget. Total budget, I think about 22,000 crores. In this development aid, which is definitely one way for foreign policy to, kind of play an active role, and money matters, is about 5,000 crores, of which going to Bhutan, Maldives, Nalanda, Chabar, Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Mauritius, other countries. Fine. I mean, it could be a lot more, should be a lot more, but once again, we don't have the bandwidth. Thirdly, yes, we need to increase the aid, and I'll come to this point, and government should attract private sector to invest in strategic projects for some such development aid projects. Next, please. Sure, I think this has been a perennial issue always of staffing. India has maybe about 1,000 diplomats, IFS. China has maybe over 6,000. America, US has over 14,000. These numbers should be increased and attract talent to serve the country. This requires money. We have to allocate money, right? The challenges are complex, too many things happening, too many foreign leaders coming to India, too many Indian leaders going to foreign countries, climate change happening, this, that, so many conferences happening, ministerials happening. We need a lot more people. Okay. Secondly, to the point that I think, again, earlier has been mentioned, my thought is that once again, I think Professor mentioned that, economy, and of course, all of us that, it's a lot about international trade and economy. Here, we must set up this thing, a wing within the foreign ministry, like the METI of Japan, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. They play an interesting role. It is a hybrid organization between a foreign ministry and the commerce ministry, right? METI Japan does smart research, it does the groundwork, it figures out the political analysis, the country risk, the market risk, it identifies who are the potential good private sector partners for Japanese companies and all. It invests a huge amount of time and money in such research, and then brings that research to the Japanese companies and says that, okay, fine, look at Toyota. There is a need for automobiles in the Indonesian market. These are the two big groups there, domestic. We've talked with them, done some homework with them. Now you go and talk with them and set up your business there. That's what METI does, in a nutshell. We need an agency like that within the MEA. Now, to have that, once again, it needs budget. So I would love to see more budgets going into such an agency being created. And lastly, I'll say, of course, there's a lot to say, but I'll just keep it short. I mean, how are we gathering intelligence about China? Fair enough, if we are shutting down or we are we are not welcoming, the Confucius Institutes, fine. But how in India are we increasing our knowledge base of Chinese culture, Chinese belief systems, Chinese language? Even if we're intercepting, electronic communications and all, how are we kind of, analyzing that? That, I think, is a core aspect of a foreign policy, to, be able to understand your adversaries and also your friends, let's say. So once again, but this needs a budget. How to figure out a policy and an approach that we have more language learning centers and cadres and cultural scholars built up in foreign affairs in India. Next, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robinder Sachdev ji. Your analysis of the interim budget in light of defense, as well as the Minister of External Affairs budget, and how the analysis of global budgeting on defense, patterns of defense equipment trade in the dynamic world order today, importance of exporting defense equipments for critical reasons for India, and what opportunities lie in front of India in this dynamic global order was really engrossing. Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful comments on this. If there are any questions, I request the participants to raise their hands and kindly raise their questions.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening to all. I was very thoroughly engrossed with the presentations of each of the expert here, and I have a few observations, including questions, and I would like to put them up for discussion if that's okay with the panelists. First is about last year there was an announcement regarding setting up or spending around 300 crores of rupees for setting up border villages, and border villages say that they'll be set up for tourism. I want to know what has there been any update regarding it, or has there been any further movement on it, because last time it was touted to be very important, especially in terms of the Chinese side of the India-China border in the northeast, as well as in the Kashmir region with Pakistan. So one was that, and other was I want to throw this question open: is the time very ripe to further delve into the whole idea of pushing for a feminist foreign policy? And if yes, then why? And if no, then why not? And why could we have some portion of budget allocated towards this in the full budget, maybe? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So this Pew survey mentioned that only 51% of the Americans hold a positive view about India, and top of the list is Israel. Israelis hold a very good view, around 71%. So should we have more of should we have some allocations to have more of that diplomatic people-to-people contacts and further confidence building measures that would raise positive views about India, and that would perhaps end up having more foreign tourists in India, not just medical tourism, wherein we offer cheaper medical facilities and other things, but also in terms of tourism, where India is the go-to destination for people from abroad. So if perhaps maybe Mr. Robinder, if you could take this, and then Professor Chakravorty and Sanjukta ma'am.
Thank you so much, Simi. Great questions. One on border villages, I do not know much whatever has transpired, but I do know something. I'm on the board of trustees of the Children's Book Trust, a children's book publisher, oldest of India. And we had reached across to the district collector of a district in Arunachal, which was supposed to be building one of such model villages. Unfortunately, on that, at our end, we followed up some, but we've not seen much progress in that one specific case. But I would imagine must be happening going ahead. Push for feminist foreign policy, absolutely yes. I mean, the point is, if you couple of things, creativity. Right. The more diversity, the more there is creativity. And of course, then has also equity. So I leave that there. More definitely, yes. But coming to your point about India's image and foreign tourism in India, definitely see India's image is growing as an economy, as a nation, as a thoughtful force. But at the same time, there are some little, concerns I've had, probably I would say maybe misplaced. One of the things is that, we are getting a little bit more argumentative in our foreign policy. Okay. We are the discourse, by we, I mean a general sense, right? I'm not saying our government, but let's say a lot of it is our social media also, right? And I give a parallel to China on this. See, China got into huge image trap. Okay, it has problems, but into an image trap also after COVID, because assuming that COVID came from Wuhan. all of China's wolf warrior diplomacy of the past, which had been there, suddenly the West ganged up against China. And the reason for the West and US to gang up, quote unquote, against China, one is very clear. China wants to be number one. America says, no, I will not let you be. China says, come on, dare to stop me. Somewhere down the line, we will also be moving from number 3 to number 2, or from number 2 to number 1, wherever, right? When we are crossing such thresholds, there will be a lot of people out there not happy with us, then who could, given slow narratives building up, gang up against our rise also in some sense. So that's one, a big picture concern I have. But absolutely, yes, people to people relations, all my work is actually public diplomacy, people to people. Better understandings, and actually tourism, not only economy, tourism helps understanding also. In fact, one of the issues I was kind of tossing once upon a time is that we should encourage more tourists from China to come to India. The more the tourists come to India, and in some way, let them enjoy the sense and aroma of a democracy. Let more and more of them come here, enjoy and see what a democracy can be, go back to China, and over a period of time, maybe in 10, 20 years, that builds up a perception narrative in favor of more living under a democratic system rather than an autocratic system, right? So, so tourism can absolutely serve to achieve multiple purposes also. And a brand, absolutely brand, I think General Chakravorty or Professor Bhattacharya was saying, we do not have a global brand. Sure, we are, creating components as such, but we do not have a brand. And one issue in our brand is honestly quality, the perception of quality. We need to improve our perception of quality, and then perception of quality in our brands, and more narratives. In fact, in the MEA, in my presentation, when I was making few bullet points, I thought of putting in the fact that there should be more PR. Okay, by PR, I mean not just vague public relations, I mean performance and reporting, more branding, more reaching out, budget within our MEA. They must have some. I would like to dig down and see how much they have. But once again, where is the money? We need more and more of this happening.
Thank you so much, sir. Major General.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Simi. All that I would say, all your three questions will be specific. As far as border villages are concerned, we are addressing the problem. We definitely, as it is, we are looking at these villages for what little we could do, we always did. But I'm so happy now a government policy has come on it. And once you do it, possibly this is the way China, Vietnam, they secure their borders by these villages. And China has another policy that you take the border village into enemy territory also. So that's a great thing. So those are the issues with, I'm saying everything doesn't have to be looked like, there are what you call it, one has to have a little bit of, shall we say, pragmatism in whatever one does. And so therefore you develop the border village, then you automatically make those people your soldiers. So we are doing it. It'll take some time. Everything takes, because our borders are not that you reach over there. It's not the border of France with Germany, or border of even Russia with Ukraine, where you can just drive across, or border of Russia with Finland. It's a border. Today, if you want to reach a border, you have to struggle to reach there. You can't just, what you call, reach. You can reach Srinagar, but from there you need to go. Next, you are asking about this issue of feminine thing. I think there's no doubt about it that we must have feminine people. We are the National Defense Academy is going to have the third or fourth batch now of women officers cadets coming in. So within the armed forces, we have taken a view that what you call the ladies must come, feminine this thing, and even in the foreign policy, a lot of our ambassadors have done a marvelous job on the feminine side. Definitely, I think there is no doubt about it. Okay, that you must stop it, and you must rather introduce more of feminine this thing. Now, this issue about people-to-people contact, I think that's the most important thing. The more India is an open country, and I think the more people you allow come in and see us. I mean, say, where do you have a country where people from Pakistan come and buy houses in Mumbai? Even today, they want to come and settle over here. They are Pakistani citizens. They would like to buy houses. They're still fighting for that Jinnah's house, which is with Nusli Wadia. All right. So that is the value which we have. Definitely, we must open up, not only to Israelis and Americans. I can assure you, we are a very loved country. I've been to China, and even Chinese people admire us. As a matter of fact, if you go to Russia, you'll see people singing Hindi songs of Raj Kapoor. You go to China, there are many people who speak Hindi. So, I'm not talking only about these two countries which you named, US and Israel. Undoubtedly, the more you open up, the better it is. And we are open. Let them come. It is they who are not coming. We haven't stopped anybody as such. Maybe we have stopped some this thing. Yeah, now with China and all, there's some problems. But otherwise, we haven't put much restrictions. There are more restrictions from them to us. From our side, I think we are very open. I mean, say, even people are going and playing all sorts of games and all, and so therefore goes without saying. I've finished my part.
Thank you, sir. Professor Bhattacharya, if you could also speak about, and that question I'd segue into Dr. Behera also, about India's, just yesterday, US ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, he mentioned that India is on the driving seat of Quad. Would you really agree with it? And because there have been counter opinion also from scholars from various parts of the world, including from India, and the importance of India on the organization, especially when there are so many other regional setups focused on the Indo-Pacific that are there. So your views on that, please. Thank you. Please unmute, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Mehta. Nice to see you here too. I take your last question first. Quad, and are we on the driving seat of Quad? In fact, basically, the Americans would like to see us in the driving seat of Quad. Maybe, I mean, at least they'll pay lip service to it. But actually, are we under the circumstances? I do not think. Personally, I do not think so, certainly, because to be on the driving seat, you need to be the policymaker. Are we policymakers? When it comes to basically Quad's idea of South China Sea or whatever, that they're planning. No, we may or may not agree with what the USA decides on, or what the others decide on, but we certainly we are not the decision makers. A driver is a decision maker, right? So I have my doubts whether we are on the driving seat. Certainly, we are part of the Quad, okay? And to a certain extent, in fact, we're a very important part of the Quad because we are strategically placed in the Indo-Pacific, okay? So especially since we share borders with China, China is interested in the Indian Ocean region. It is coming into the Indian Ocean region. Can you hear me, Simi? Okay, they are coming into the Indian Ocean region. In fact, we are worried about them. And in fact, much of our defense is actually concentrated on our borders with China, and basically China, we make policies. But when it comes to Quad, or it as such, here we are not the decision makers. Okay, so I'm not going to say that we are in the driving seat. We are very much there. We are part of the wagon. Okay, I'm not going to say it's bandwagon, but it's wagon. We are part of it, and we are independently making decisions also, because when it comes to, for instance, the American action in the Red Sea and what they're formed against the Houthi, we are not joining that, but we are certainly there as a partner when we need to be a partner. So basically, we are independently, we are in the wagon. Okay, we are not bandwagoning, but we are not on the driver's seat. Going back to your earlier questions, okay. Let me take people to people first, okay? Since this is something that I have worked on, especially in when it comes to Africa, people to people contact and all that. And here, in fact, I'm going to repeat the same thing. People to people is very, very important, but people to people also needs, okay? For instance, when it comes to Africa, we have all these ITech and all these other programs, and we try to bring in students, all right, attract students to study here, then they go back and they have a good image. But, I think we need to be prepared ourselves. Indians, not you and I, but, well, people on the streets, they need to be what? They should know. If you go to China, if you go to Japan, you go to Singapore, well, when they meet somebody from Africa or they meet somebody from even India or whatever, they behave just like they would with their own people, okay? Here, in fact, there is a tendency to kind of, behave in a very different way, which can put off people. So when you have P2P, all right, when you have people-to-people contact, you should also prepare the people in India for this kind of a thing, all right? It's a very good thing to have, but the image, okay? And for that matter, in fact, I think social media is very important, the kind of image. In fact, what my previous speaker was saying, Major General, what you were saying is very important. And what Mr. Sachdeva was saying is also very important. You need to the PR, all right, as such, which is also basically this thing. What should be added to that, and how you build the image of India, and Indians should also have an image of India, which is not exclusively, a kind of an Indian, an Atmanirbhar Hindu or something like that. No, we should be very different, open-minded to basically have P2P relationships, all right? So that, I think, is very, very important. When you bring in students, we are opening universities here in India, which are foreign universities, and we want to attract foreign students, but they should have a good experience when they're here, number one. Secondly, when you come to feminist foreign policy, there's a difference between theory and practice, okay? When you talk about feminist foreign policy as a theory, that's a different thing, all right, as such. And in fact, you have a lot of people who talk about feminist foreign policy and all that, and there are many angles to it. But when it comes to practice, if you basically look at, well, women prime ministers, say Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, Margaret Thatcher, okay, they are prime ministers of the country. They're not just basically women. So basically, they have the national interest in mind, all right? So there's a difference between having a woman prime minister or women in the, suppose you have women in, as the Major General would say, basically they are joining, they go to fly their Rafale and all that. But, well, would they behave any differently from their male counterparts? No, because they are trained for a certain thing. So there's a difference between theory and practice. And I think this is something that is very, very important. And your first question was, Simi, if you could just repeat the first question.
Ma'am, it was about the border villages. If
yeah,
you...
border villages, right. When it comes to border villages, the Major General talks about border villages. I really do not know. Following the news, the Chinese seem to have built a lot of border villages. Basically, NDTV has these satellite pictures which they show about Chinese border villages along the border, or as such, along the border of Bhutan and all the way up. But they have not shown any pictures of Indian villages across the border, and I really have not heard anything about building of border villages by Indians. But maybe I'm totally wrong. I've missed out, so I really cannot answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhattacharya. Dr. Behera, thank you for sitting so patiently, and we love to hear your views. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Simi. So I think you asked some very insightful questions, but I'll take a few of them. So on Quad, I think I'll take this first. So I have little different views from what Professor Bhattacharya said just now. So as far as India's role in Quad, whether it is a driving seat or not, I think my answer will be yes and no. I mean, to understand that, you have to understand the origin, its reactivation of Quad. So it has its origin in 2004 after the tsunami, but the first meeting happened in 2007. Then from 2017 to 2019, I mean, nothing much was happening. But all of a sudden, there was reactivation, and that's reactivation. Can you hear me?
Arjun, if you could. Arjun?
I think General Chakravorty is saying something.
Yeah. No, actually, he's on another call, so we could
Okay.
perhaps.
Yeah, I think the host can mute him. So
Yeah.
yeah. So okay. So I was talking about the 2019. I think it got reactivated in 2017 or 19, and that has to do with India's decisions. So India was reluctant to actually wholeheartedly adopt Quad because, like somebody said, we are the only country which shares a land border, and our previous government was not very keen to antagonize because China was very much against Quad, which it described at some point of time as equivalent to Asian NATO, which it is not. If you visit NATO headquarters, you know NATO, then Quad is nothing like that. The Quad doesn't have a secretariat. Forget about the military presence. Of course, Quad has Malabar, but it's not actually part of Quad. So the point I was highlighting is that it's because India was not interested, and India was not interested because India was little apprehensive of how China would behave, and India was also not very sure of the other Quad members. If you remember, before the other countries, Australia and Japan, Australia in particular. So the previous prime minister, I mean, they were very happy with doing trade with China. So India was not very sure whether they will also wholeheartedly support Quad. But once the Australian and Chinese relationship deteriorated, and India thought that okay, it is deteriorated for good, and Japan, of course, India had a lot of confidence there. Then only, and the major factor is actually the not the Galwan, the Doklam. Doklam and then Galwan convinced India that okay, so to counter China, India needs some kind of support partnership with other countries, and Quad actually fit into that scheme of things. So before that, India was not itself interested to antagonize China. It was not sure about the other partners. But once India made up its mind that okay, to challenge to challenge China militarily, it needs support, partner support, and when it becomes sure that the other members are also taking anti-China stand, then it became very sure that okay, so that is how actually India took interest, and then past meeting happened, ministerial meeting happened, then led to summit meeting. I think 2 or 3 summit level meetings have happened. So we could have another meeting on January 26th, but I think because of the US election season, so that didn't happen. But I think that way India is driving Quad to some extent. No, because you look at the Quad partners. So other partners are the US alliance partners. India is not a India is a major I think defense partner, but not an alliance partner. So that way, it doesn't. I don't agree with decision making because it's in such kind of forums, everything is actually taken into decision is taken on the basis of consensus. It's not that you can impose anything on anybody. So I think there is a convergence of interest. That interest is driven by Chinese aggressiveness. As long as that remains core to the group, I think the group will come together and take the key decisions. So I think yeah, other points have been covered by others. So border village, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was not announced as part of budget. I think it was announced separately by the Home Ministry, partly in response to what China is doing on their side. So we thought that okay, if we develop the borders, then these people they will not only get the improved infrastructure, but they would also be the ear and eye for our intelligence agencies because you need local intelligence. And then your claim in the when the border negotiation takes place, I think there is an agreement. It all depends on the settlement. So if you don't have people living in certain areas, so your claim to that area actually weakens in that way. So I think that has to do with the border village that we want to set up. You also talked about 50% positive view about the India in US, but I think you have to look at the bipartisan support that India enjoys in US. So that's a very rare thing. Pakistan doesn't, China doesn't. So as long as I think as long as India enjoys that, I think it doesn't matter really 40%, 50%. Tourism, how can it actually improve? I don't know. I personally see our tourism sector, the major tourist destinations are not actually, I mean, we are infrastructure deficient. I mean, except for few metros, if you go to other places, I think there is not good infrastructure. And I think that is what the present government is trying to do. And they know that there is a lot of scope for spiritual, cultural, religious tourism. That is why in the latest budget also, government has announced some schemes. So because religious tourism, cultural tourism, they are not very interested, or I mean, they can little tolerate the inconvenience of infrastructure efficiency. But if we create some kind of linkages, road infrastructure, hotel, basic amenities, I think, and the tourist destination itself, etc., then we can attract a good chunk of people to those places. So foreign policy, feminist driven. So I agree with Professor Bhattacharya. So as long as you have a credible, strong foreign policy, it doesn't really matter who is actually driving it. So national interest, irrespective of the man or woman, it doesn't really matter. So our foreign policy, the basic motto is create a conducive atmosphere so that our country can grow economically. So that is our motto. So as long as who drives it, irrespective of who drives, doesn't really matter.
Thank you, Dr. Behera. I would want to ask you another question about the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor that was launched last year during the G20 summit. And very soon after it was launched, and it received a very huge global attention given the expanse of it. And even our Prime Minister had mentioned that it is going to be a game changer for hundreds of years to come. And also that people will remember for posterity that this corridor was launched in the Indian soil. So, and this was also reiterated by our finance minister in this interim budget. However, just after the corridor was launched, Israel had, that Israel-Hamas conflict, it grew, uh, and right after that, President Biden was quoted as saying, because this corridor has the term India in it, perhaps that is why it could have fueled this. One of the reasons for the war could be the corridor. But again, reiterating this in the budget, and just saying that it is very geopolitically and geostrategically very important. How do you see that? Are we going to have earmarking of funds, or are we going, because this as of present it stands in a limbo, and there's not much conversation. Perhaps would this be taken around in the next G20 in Brazil, or what? And secondly is about there is escalation of tensions between India and Maldives, and then slightly less. Around 100 crore 150 crores rupees was development assistance has been reduced to Maldives. But still, this really focuses on India trying to maintain its diplomatic efforts, that we are not really outrightly denying any development assistance to Maldives. So this perhaps also shows maybe India's neighborhood first policy, um, and wanting to ensure that India is still a player vis-a-vis China. So your views on that, sir?
Yeah, so thank you. I think there are two very important questions. I'll take your second question first, the India-Maldives relationship. Obviously, it has taken a downturn because of the anti-India campaign and the present dispensation in the Maldives, which actually rose to power because of anti-India campaign. So I think it's a difficult moment for India, and you have to understand this relationship through the geo-economic lens. Now, see, China is trying to come to the Indian Ocean region. It has a large presence in South Asia. India wants to retain its major presence or dominance in the region. So, both China and India is actually playing the geoeconomic card. So, geoeconomic card means how you use your economic instruments and to promote your strategic goals in other countries. So, India has been doing that. And in fact, if you look at India's economic assistance, I think 60 to 70% is in actually South Asia. And despite the relationship actually going back to worse, India still, I think, not 100 crore, I think more than that has been given to. So India is actually, I think, I mean, you have to appreciate India's stand. So even if there are a lot of noises which came from Maldives, so Indian diplomacy, the leadership remain quite silent, because they know that you have to work on the table silently convince them. There are a lot of scope for negotiation, but we have to also understand the domestic politics of Maldives. If that politics, the presidency or that party in power is actually rose to that power, to that position because of anti-understand. So, I mean, after all, Maldives is a sovereign country, so you can't just invade and then get rid of all the opposition. So you have to tolerate this thing and then work silently. But you have to play your geoeconomic cards. You just can't be just antagonized and then throw into spanner. So I think you have to keep that momentum, the economic assistance, whatever we could do. Of course, we have difficulties in terms of how much we can provide compared to China, but I think we have leverages, and so we can do that. And the fact that we can reach Maldives whenever there is a natural crisis faster than China, which we demonstrated, I think, few years ago when we sent the water tankers, etc. So that leverages are there, and we have to actually should be we should not stop talking to them. In fact, we should engage them more diplomatically and economically, because this is a vital country, because of its presence in the Indian Ocean and its location to the trading routes. So we can't take Maldives lightly. I make Of course, this was, I think, the biggest announcement. I think a very big infrastructure announcement. And this is primarily in response to the BRI, because the BRI is spread to its tentacles. Thankfully, it has actually drawn a lot of negative attention because of the debt trap and other negative publicities. And it was a wonderful time for us actually to announce this in G20, and it was actually supported by many players in the region. But unfortunately, it has actually been caught in a geopolitical impact. So as of now, I don't see any progress on this major project, because because you have to take into account the Saudi Arabia's role, Israel's role, and then so I mean those are now in a good term. So earlier they were talking about Israel can probably Saudi Arabia can actually make up or actually mend its ties with Israel, but I don't think that happening now. So I think for the foreseeable future, till this Gaza crisis actually subsides, and instead of the crisis being coming down, it is actually flaring up. I mean, now it started between two parties, Israel and Hamas. Now it's spread out to almost all Middle East. You have Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, they are all cut off in a measure. So every day there is a bombing in one place or other. And so I think the focus would be how to control the regional crisis there. As of now, I don't see much happening on the IMEC front
Thank you.
because
Thank
of
you
the
so much.
geopolitical challenges. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. Samiran, do you want to ask a question, or would you like to go on for the concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go for vote of thanks.
Maybe we can have a minute each for Professor Bhattacharya and Mr. Robinder for the concluding thoughts.
Yeah, sure.
Professor Bhattacharya?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me just. Actually, I could not hear this, and that is why, in fact, I was. Oh my God! Just a second. Let Mr. Sachdeva speak while I.
Hi. Okay. Thank you, Simi. I'll just quickly bullet points 3. When you're talking about people to people, one area which I didn't mention is the diaspora. India's diaspora plays a huge role, or at least some role, in relations with at least some countries, especially in the US. I mean, like the US-India civil nuclear deal, one little component was the contribution of the Indian diaspora in the US. So that's more people to people again, right? Second is, again, back to the idea of our image. Why should we be going out claiming ourselves? What I'm saying is, we do not want to be seen arrogant. Why should we be looking to get ourselves called as Vishwa Guru? Or why should we ourselves say we are Vishwa Guru? I think what Prime Minister Modi did was a very smart statement. He said, Vishwa Mitra. Yeah, let's go out to the world with this idea that we are friends and we are Mitra, we are friends of the world, right? So rather than saying, let others call us Vishwa Guru, but we should not be, this thing on ourselves that we are the Vishwa Guru, latest best thing since sliced bread. The issue of Quad, Yes, if not in the drawing, see what the US is essentially saying, as Professor Bhattacharya said, it's a wagon. India is the creaky, slow wheel. So what they're saying is that India, if you come with us as to what we want, then of course the whole quad will move much faster. Hence, therefore, you are in the driver's seat. Whereas what Professor Bhattacharya very rightly said, you're the driver when you are the one sitting or curating the policy initiative. We are not curating. The policy has been curated or approached by the US, let's say, big picture. Now we are maybe, dragging our feet. So they're saying, okay, if you stop dragging your feet, then the whole thing will gather momentum, and therefore you are in the driving seat. So that's the purpose logic or some logic there. Lastly, this whole thing of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, I think it's a pipe dream. You know what? And in any case, it's a long-term project. It's a pipe dream. It's a huge money investment. They're talking about having a physical network across Saudi, UAE, etc., wherein you have railway track, you have green hydrogen going in pipelines. Green hydrogen, we've not figured out yet. The world has not yet figured out how to transport it in ships or even in local transportation in trucks. A pipeline transporting green hydrogen, I don't know when that could be real, maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years, I don't know. But these are futuristic, and who's putting the money? The idea therein, which the US stitched together, was that the money the Saudis and the UAE will put, okay? The US will bring its technology, the locomotive technology or whatever technologies, etc. And what India will do, India will be the services talent who kind of stitches engineering all of this together. That's the big picture here. And on top of it, so that itself is a huge delayed project. There's no direct money. And as I think Dr. Behera was saying right now, given the geopolitical context, the India-Middle East corridor, Europe, is a dream, is a pipe dream, maybe, in that sense. I'll just leave it there. I had another point, but maybe in the interest of time, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. Professor Bhattacharya?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Because I don't know, my screen has suddenly become, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Let me shut the door. So my phone is actually working there. Put it somewhere else. The IMEC corridor. In fact, you said that India, because of the name of India being there, I do not think so. Israel was very much part of the whole thing. Was planned beforehand, the Hamas attack and all that. And as Mr. Sachdeva said, it's a pipe dream. I wouldn't call it a pipe dream. It is possible sometime in the future, perhaps. And in fact, if you look at basically what is happening under the radar, all right, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the two were supposed to, in fact, come to some kind of agreement, but that is not going to happen in the near future. But that doesn't mean that they're broken off completely. Under the radar, there is still some contact going on from what one hears. So basically, they are keeping in touch because primarily what drives the world is the economy. Okay, now this is going to benefit, all right, as such, not just India, Europe, the whole of the Middle East, especially in the question of, and we're talking about green technology and all that. These countries in the Middle East, those which are rich, they depend on hydrocarbons, all right, as such. They are thinking in terms of shifting to, in fact, green technology because, well, because of climate change and the kind of pressures that are coming on them. And here, of course, they have to think of the future. And the future basically, well, we do not know what it holds, but it certainly does not hold hydrocarbons, all right, given what is happening to the climate, all right. So definitely they have to change technologically. And here, in fact, India can play a very important role because, we are tech savvy and we produce it at a much lower cost. Whatever is coming, innovation is there. Of course, as we said that we need more budget and all that, we need more money, but definitely, even if you look at people who are talking about green technology, etc., who are producing this kind of thing outside, many of them are of Indian origin. So basically, India will stands well. So IMEC maybe will fruition in the future, not in the near future, but maybe at a later future. So it is there, and I don't think it's India. It could be to disrupt, all right, any further agreements, all right, after basically the Abraham Accords and all that. The Hamas found itself kind of cornered, and in fact, it moved closer towards Iran. Also, there are other countries, in fact, Saudi Arabia and Iran, in the kind of gap which happened following the 2011 and the various disruptions which took place in the Middle East, Iran began to emerge as a bigger power, Iraq having gone down, Saudi Arabia was there and Iran, and they have always been rivals. So basically, the entire situation in the Middle East is a kind of complex situation. But I don't think here the name of India in the corridor, I mean, that has nothing to do with it, really. So IMEC, India is seen very well, not only by well, we have good agreements with UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with many of these countries, with Iran also, and now with Israel. We have always been taken up Palestinian cause. Now we don't. And so basically, in fact, we may face that kind of a thing. I mean, till, in fact, the Modi government came, we have always sided for basically the Palestinians and the PLO even earlier. But the fact is, we still have not, I mean, when it comes to the UN and all that, we abstain from votes, but when it comes to talk, we do talk on it as such. Okay. Now, the other thing about Maldives, etc., as I said, basically social media is very important, and how it plays out, and basically framing ourselves, positioning ourselves, imaging ourselves is very important over there. That's all about, since we're really running out of time, I don't think I want to kind of expand on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Dr. Behera, would you want to just add 30 seconds of your thoughts in
I
conclusion?
think, yeah, I have done. So,
Okay. Thank you so much. Samiran, over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Simi Mehta, for those enlightening, for those engrossing questions, and all the panelists for making those engrossing responses. Am I audible clearly now?
yes.
Thank you. So, as we come to end of today's discussion, I, Samiran Galgali, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, CIRSS. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on Defense, Foreign Policy and Interim Union Budget 2024-25. We are grateful to our chair for the session, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, and our esteemed panelists, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, Major General Dr. K Chakravorty ji, Mr. Robinder N Sachdev ji, Dr. Laxman Behera ji, for taking part in the discussion and enlightening us. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's discussion. I'm sorry. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading publications. You may also find more thematic events and book discussions under IMPRI Web Policy Talk series. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All a very good evening.